Tofino's YouTube channel. If there is no objection by unanimous consent, I will move that pursuant to sections 15 of the District of Tofino meeting procedure bylaw number 1229/2016 as amended, the May 10th, 2022 regular meeting be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcast from the District of Tofino's YouTube channel, and that the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at Municipal Hall 161 3rd Street in Tofino, BC. Being no objection, motion carried. And if there's no objection to adopting the agenda as presented, I will move that the May 10th, 2022 regular council agenda be adopted. Seeing no objection, agenda is adopted. And on the consent agenda, if there is no objection, by unanimous consent, I move that items 4.1 to 4.3 of the consent agenda on the regular council meeting held May 10th, 2022 be received and approved. Seeing no objection, motion is carried. Let's see, I've got a little note here. Ms. Best, I love your notes, by the way. And I have another recommendation here that the minutes of the special budget meeting held May 5th, 2022 be adopted. And I'll do that by unanimous consent as well. Seeing no objection, those minutes are adopted. Moving on to item 6, public comment on agenda items. Ms. Best, do we have any?
Thank you, Mayor Law. If you are a member of the public and you would like to submit a comment on an agenda item today, please use the Q&A function here in our Zoom meeting window. All you have to do is just state your name or that you'd like to speak, and we will unmute you for up to 2 minutes to speak on an agenda item. So I don't have any existing requests right now, so I will call once. We do have a few attendees today, and I will call a second time. And not seeing any submissions a third time. And there have been no requests for comment.
Okay. Moving on to mayor's reports. Well, I have some good news. Our 2022 to 2026 MRDT application, or actually 27, sorry, MRDT application submitted to the province has been approved. And so we will continue to fund tourism Tofino and see that marketing projects and programs evolve. And now, significantly, we will also see a portion of the MRDT revenue go towards wastewater treatment plant capital costs. And that will help the district to adequately serve the tremendously robust tourism economy, the number of tourists that come to our town. And I'm so thankful that the province recognized the level of use that brings to our infrastructure. And I do have a list of people that I would like to thank. And so I think this is a significant enough win for our community as a whole, our communities as a whole, that I'm just going to take the time to do it. So I want to thank Minister of Finance, Selena Robinson, and her ministry staff for seeing that Tofino is a unique town in the province, that our tiny population supports 2,500 supports upwards of 11,000 people. Mm-hmm. And so I'm so thankful for her support. I want to thank the Minister of Arts, Culture, Tourism and Sport, Melanie Marks, and her staff who've been very supportive. I want to thank Nathan Cullen, Minister Nathan Cullen, our new Municipal Affairs Minister, and his staff, who continue to work hard on our behalf to lobby for wastewater treatment plant funding. I also want to thank our very own MLA and past Minister of Municipal Affairs, Josie Osborne, who has been a tremendous asset and continues to be an asset. And I also want to thank all of the ministers in cabinet who supported our application. I want to carry on thanks to Destination BC. And I want to thank especially all the resorts in Tofino in our community. Without buy-in from a significant portion of our very own resort community, the application would have never gone to the province for consideration. And so I'm just so thankful that the largest resorts in town have found a way to support tourism-facing infrastructure, like our wastewater treatment plant. I want to thank the West Coast Hospitality Association. That's JJ Belanger and Christopher Fair, who worked hard with resorts and were able to garner support for our application. The Chamber of Commerce, Jen Dart, Laura McDonald, who also met together with other signatories for our memorandum of understanding, which was essential in moving this forward. I want to thank our very own tourism Tofino, Nancy Cameron, who I understand is retiring. Nancy's done a tremendous job, has been very successful in her role as Executive Director of Tourism Tofino. And I was thankful to have her in our community roundtable and her support for this application. I want to thank Jack Gilly of our Tofino Ratepayers Association, who had excellent things to say at our community roundtable, and I look forward to hearing more from Jack. I want to thank especially Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation Chief Thomas George, who supported our application. I want to thank Saya and his admin team with Tribal Parks. I cannot stress enough how essential Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation is and was in support of this application going forward. And I personally very much look forward to working closer with Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation and approaching the province as we have agreed to do, to find new and novel ways of finding equity and sharing resources. And I want to thank Kirby Brown, who facilitated our roundtable, which made all of this possible. He's an excellent facilitator. Without Kirby, I don't think I'd be having such good news to announce. Trying to secure a portion of the hotel tax MRDT has been discussed in the community for many years. And I remember distinctly hearing that it was impossible, we could not do it, but we did it. And the reason we were able to do it is because we were able to come together as a community and try. And the other reason we were able to do it is because Bob and Nyla worked so hard on it. So I do want to thank our outgoing CAO and our incoming CAO, Bob McPherson and Nyla Atiana. Absolutely tremendously hardworking folks who make our community such a great place to live and are true gems in our organization. So let's keep the momentum going, is what I want to say. This is a good start. We've got a great government to work with on all levels, and I look forward to seeing more success. That's my rather lengthy mayor's report. We have no delegations. I believe we're moving on to correspondence. We have Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation regarding dispersed and unauthorized camping and an RMI request. I think for this one, just for viewers, this is a request. We've got an issue with unauthorized, dispersed and unauthorized camping, especially out on West Main in the Kennedy Lake region. It's caused all sorts of problems, and TFN received some funding for equipment and have stepped up to take part in a role of education, prevention, funding. Now, The request is to use for the District of Tofino to support with RMI funding as well as equivalent. But we have a couple comments, and I think we're going to bat back and forth, Mr. McPherson.
Sure, I'll lead off, and I know you've had some conversations. So I have talked with the letter writer actually prior to him writing the letter about the issue and the challenge, and certainly understand and empathize with the challenge where this is an important issue to Tla-o-qui-aht and an important issue to other communities, and Tla-o-qui-aht are really trying to act on what the task force wanted to see done, and they're looking for financial support. With respect to the idea of using RMI, it's something that we did discuss, and April Fromont from our office has followed up on that with Ministry of Tourism. It is not a permitted use because it's operational, not a permitted use of RMI funds. So we could seek permission to use the funds for a non-permitted reason. That would probably take longer than the summer, so not likely to bear any fruit. April happens to be in Victoria presently and is meeting with Ministry of Tourism folks. They may have some ideas about some other funding sources to support this. So something that we do want to keep our eye on. It would be unfortunate if all the work of the committee and the commitment from Tla-o-qui-aht were to go for naught because of falling short by a few $1,000s. So as staff, we're continuing to look for funding sources for this.
Go ahead, Tom.
Had there been any reach out to ACRD as that regional initiative? And initially, this is where this sat with. Have there been any conversations with staff at the ACRD?
So let me roll into that. Sure. Councillor Steer, is that I've been sitting on the Dispersed and Unauthorized Camping Task Force and Working Group, and that includes the ACRD, that includes the province, multiple levels of province, as well as the surrounding communities. And this has come up, and it is in discussion to try to find some funding in different areas. I've also personally met with our MLA and our minister as both, Mr. Osborne. And there is at that level as well a search for the appropriate funding from the appropriate stream. And so we recognize that it's, RMI isn't necessarily the right route, but there are some other routes that are presently being explored. So I think.
And Your Worship, if I may just add to that, and in response to Councillor Steer's inquiry about ACRD, it was actually the conversation was the CAO from the regional district, myself, TFN, as well as UCLULIT, talking about this issue. The challenge for a regional district, as you understand, is the way that funding works is like a service area would have to be set up to collect the money and then fund it. So that might be something that can happen in the longer term, but again, the ACRD's budget had passed quite some time ago, so there isn't an opportunity to do anything this year unless there's some discretionary money that regional districts have that I've never heard of. Again, I think there was support for the ideas as much as staff can support it, but just not a way to fund it.
Right, because initially when this was brought to the attention, and it was brought through the ACRD, and one of the initial funding sources was the COVID recovery money initially to set, and it morphed into the task force that had been created. So I was just wondering if there might have been anything within that realm that still a little bit, obviously not.
Well, there's a question for us though, Mr. McPherson, if council did want to somehow help fund this, is there an appropriate route for, noting that it's outside of the municipality, but within the region?
That's something we'd have to get back to you on. There might be, I don't know, not sitting next to me to kick me under the table, but we could look at contingency. I don't think there's necessarily a prohibition on funding something outside of our boundary, where if it is something that's within the municipal interest to see done. As council is aware, our budgets are pretty tight this year. So not something that I want to answer in this moment, but if that's something you'd like staff to get back to you on, then we can do that in time for the next council meeting.
I think that would be my preference, but I'm looking to council. Just to see if there's any route. So we have something to consider.
Yep.
Okay, Councilor Anderson.
In the future, would it, I'm not sure, I guess this wouldn't really apply, but I'm just wondering if a council grant might be a way of providing some funding. I realize normally I think we need to fund nonprofits, but I'm not sure what the structure of these organizations are. So the other comment I have on the letter, I'm wondering if UCLUIT is also interested in some work in the backcountry, as it's called here, being part of the same region that may be part of the source of camping and campers. There might be something we could do together. And my third thing I'd like to add is if this group that you're working with on dispersed camping, if there's a letter of support we could put somewhere to a minister or something, and maybe both UCLUIT and Tofino could support a funding notion and encourage ministry to do that. Certainly, I think we'd have a role there as well.
So I think there probably sounds like there are a few things for, but what I'm hearing from council is you don't want to see this initiative die. So what staff can do is get back to council on how conversations with the province have matured over the course of a few weeks, as well as is there something we can do in the short term, but then is there a longer term commitment we can make, and perhaps not by grant, but by like a funding arrangement that is for more than just 1 year at a time, so that it's reliable and they know that they can start up the next spring. So we can answer the shorter term questions in the shorter term and then work with council to do some planning for the longer term. Again, understanding this is something that the council is interested in.
Excellent. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Anderson's suggestion, and I thought of this too, about a letter of support going to the Ministry of Land Stewardship, and maybe there's another ministry. I think that's a really good idea. I'm just concerned a little bit about how the funding would be spent in terms of are there any legal constraints or risks in going into the backcountry? I guess it's a question that we haven't sort of encountered before, so we don't really know what exactly or how the money might be spent, or what the possible risks are for TFN guardians, perhaps, with endorsing this program. So yeah, there's a lot more questions I have with regard to that, but certainly I think the province needs to be involved. As the letter writer noted, that there was a mention of being Crown land, and so who's under whose authority is this land, and how do we oversee it in the proper and rightful way? So
thank you.
for the discussion.
And those questions are actually being addressed, like they're definitely being discussed at a very high level with the working group and with the Minister Osborne. So it's an interesting place as we transition, I would say, with stewardship and land questions and who does what. So very good question. So
right, and I wouldn't want to preempt that process, because I think that is really the overarching problem that we need to solve.
I think I can say from being part of the working group that this was the main, a part of the main suggestion was to have the guardians to do this particular, it's just funding. And then also in conjunction with with the ministry, resource management officers, and of course, conservation officers as well. So those questions are being addressed and certainly being talked about.
Thank you.
But yes, Councillor Mr. McPherson, I think that's a great idea. So thank you.
Okay.
Moving along, let's go to, we have presentations and reports. 10.1 council grants. Now, there has been some discussion noted about these amongst councillors and staff, and noting that there are some significant issues, I think, with possible eligibility questions, the amounts that are being requested and the amounts that we have, and some other issues that have come up in discussion that it is my suggestion that we defer this council grant discussion to perhaps the next regular council meeting. And in the meantime, it's my suggestion to council that I would strike council would strike, I guess I could strike a grant committee consisting of 3 councillors and a staff member to go over these applications appropriately, to vet them for eligibility and other aspects, and then come back to council with a comprehensive suggestion. Is that something that, yeah?
Yeah, agreed.
Now, Ms. Bass, do I need to make a motion for that, or can I simply defer that here? How would you?
Thank you, Mayor Law. Our council procedure bylaw requires that the mayor can strike a standing committee of council. So the mayor may do this. However, just keep in mind that the committee itself must be comprised of half of council members, and you may appoint other members that are not council members to the standing committee, and that can then be reported back to the next council meeting.
So just to be clear, half of the committee is council and half are not.
At least half of the members of a standing committee of council must be from members of council.
Okay, my intention is just to strike a committee of 3 councillors and 1 staff member, and then to go over these applications. That's what we're going to do. And, do you need a motion for that, or for me to defer this to the next meeting?
I think a motion would be appropriate, just in terms of record keeping for everything. So
Super.
If I may request you in the motion read a standing committee of council.
Yep. So I'm going to move that the council grant applications for 2022 be referred to a standing committee of council to be determined. 3 members, do you want me to say it? Okay, but it will consist of 3 members of council and 1 staff member. And that we will consider these council grant applications at the next regular council meeting.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Thick. Any further questions, comments? Oh, sorry, Councillor McMaster, did you have a question?
Yeah, more of a comment actually. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't have a problem with deferring this or setting up a committee. I do take issue to comments that have been passed on email recently from members of council about which grants meet certain criteria or shouldn't, because I think that's almost leading to debate over email, and that's something we shouldn't be doing.
Fair enough. Councillor.
Through the mayor, and if you would like, you could appoint members of council today, so we know which members of council will be appointed to the standing committee. So this might be a good opportunity for council to determine who will be on the standing committee.
Do you want me to do that in the middle of the motion? Why don't we do it now? Okay. Can I look to council to see who is interested in being on a committee? Councillor McMaster, Councillor Thick, Councillor Challenger. Okay, then I'll appoint you each to be the 3 members of council And then we will find the appropriate staff member to accompany you. And excellent. Well, then if there's no further comment, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed, motion's carried.
Just for information, then we're speaking about, but just for the benefit of those who may be watching, are we talking about the decisions will be made 2 weeks from today at the next council meeting after deliberation by the committee?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
It'll give the committee a chance to really understand what exactly the eligibility requirements are and to make those deliberations adequately. Moving on, 10.2, communications update. We have a verbal report from corporate services. Is that you, Ms. Pence?
Thank you, Mayor Law. I just like to take this opportunity to introduce our communications coordinator, Sarah Gray, who will be doing this presentation for us.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Hopefully you can see my screen and also see myself. If not, I am here and happy to be here to present a very brief general communications update for you. So this presentation will hopefully provide some further insight into some of the more unique communications pieces that do not necessarily fall within specific projects or requirements. I will take you through some communications highlights from the last few months, share some general communication statistics, provide updates on some exciting changes, as well as share a few things to look forward to in the next few months. So starting off with some of our highlights, and bearing in mind this is just a few highlights from the last few months. We were one of 11 communities in BC that co-hosted a virtual high ground hike as part of the Tsunami Preparedness Week. This was in partnership with EMBC. We also participated more recently in Emergency Preparedness Week, focusing on education and awareness. You may have also spotted our emergency program coordinator at the Tofino Co-op as part of that week, leading the community engagement around that. This year, we also joined the Mobilising Municipalities movement as part of Earth Day with 250 other municipalities across Canada. This movement aims to unite communities and make positive impact through community engagement and awareness. Of course, this year we did focus on becoming the first municipality in BC with our single-use plastics cutlery. So there we are. Finally, we also joined in celebration and appreciation during National Volunteer Week. And we have also begun to take steps in a more collaborative communications approach, more recently supporting with communications around the Sort and Go rollout with ACRD, and are working on a shared messaging approach with the District of Tla-o-qui-aht. So just to take you through some of the statistics. So at the start of this year, we started to track the media requests that we have been receiving. And to date, we have had over 40 requests come in that we're aware of. I'm sure there's a few that I have not been looked in on. Of this number, only 4 were ultimately declined, with the remainder either being provided with a written statement, press release, interview with the mayor, or where appropriate, a staff interview. The mailing list, so this refers to users that are signed up through our MailChimp account and does not currently include recreation email communications, which continue to go out through the Perfect Mind platform. Our mailing list currently receives council meeting notices, council highlights, as well as a monthly district news email. So moving on to Talk Tofino, which of course is our primary engagement platform. We currently have 301 registered users on this platform. This number is a little bit more vague, as direct engagement does vary on a project by project basis. This number also only refers to individuals who make the decision to create an account to engage, and does not include any individuals who access project information without an active account. To date this year, we have created 4 new project pages. This includes our First Street dock changes, the business license regulation bylaw updates, the MUP upgrades, and the development approvals framework. I'm sure following the budget process, this will change in the coming few weeks as more projects move onto that platform. We have a combined social media following of just under 9,000, so 8,974 users. This covers Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Although we use social media as an extension of our communications, with our primary means, of course, being through the website, it is important to highlight the reach that we do have on these platforms, as this is one of our most effective means of communication during EOC activations. And just continuing on these stats, when we previously shared with Council the new website and the relaunch of the website, we mentioned that the website was set up to collect data through Google Analytics. So this now allows us to be able to see user statistics for the website. So since launching the website in January, our website has had over 19,000 individual users access the website at some point. To break that down a little bit, in the last 30 days, that totals 5.1 thousand total users, of which 4.7 have been new users, so individuals that have never accessed our website before. We are also able to break these numbers down by location. So for the benefit of this presentation, I've just included a snapshot of some of our Canada-specific numbers. No surprise, BC responsible for the largest portion of 3,179 users, followed by Ontario and Alberta. We can, of course, see statistics and views related to individual pages across the platform. So I have shared our kind of top four there. I was going to stop at 3, but was pleasantly surprised to see that council meetings had made it into that top 4 list. So recreation being the page on the website visited the most, followed by our employment page, parking, and then council meetings. So what's new? At the end of March, we made the decision to move recreation communications within the primary district accounts. So we could share, celebrate, and promote everything that we do in one place. We are continuing to work collaboratively with recreation to have regular program spotlights and features across all of our platforms. So that we are really just working to streamline our communications. And of course, we launched the new WeGo. So during the spring extravaganza event, we launched the updated recreation mascot, of course, the WeGo. This was planned as part of the initial district brand update, as the previous WeGo did include the now old district logo. We worked with local illustrator Claire Watson to give the WeGo just a little bit of a refresh. And as part of that launch, we also hosted a colouring competition judged by Mayor Law, and we'll be announcing the winner as part of the Recreation Summer Guide in the next few weeks. And finally, to wrap things up, what's next? So we are in the process of working on a who to call when guide that will help communicate the essential numbers that are often missed. So for example, who do you call when you see a bear? Who do you call when your garbage isn't collected? And many more. So we're just in the process of collecting some of those key information and getting input and insight from everybody to kind of see what we should really be highlighting in that. You will also see the return of our How to Beach Responsibly and our Water 101 content as we move into the summer months. Towards the end of this month, we have the Spring Go by Bike Week returning. So our recreation department will be leading some engagement opportunities around that. We are also working to relaunch our mailing list so that we can provide a broader selection of notification categories so that we can ensure that people have a clearer idea as well as more variety in terms of the information that they receive into their inboxes. And finally, we are also working on an update to the communications strategy. I believe the existing strategy was completed in December 2019. And since then, obviously, a lot has changed, including the addition of my role, as well as our Talk Tofino platform, and of course the new website. So we are making some updates to that, which will be hopefully coming back to share with Council not too far in the future. And that concludes everything I have to update you on.
Super, thanks. You're doing a great job.
Perfect.
That's true. It's great. Thanks, Ms. Gray.
Thanks.
Any questions from council? Comments? No.
Just really appreciate these updates. Find them highly informative from all departments. So this was very much appreciated.
Yeah, I concur. Okay, moving on, 10.3 zoning amendment bylaw number 1286, and this is for secondary suites for third reading and adoption. Normally we don't do third reading and adoption. Oh, here we are, look. Fantastic, Mr. Thick.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Hope everyone can hear me. I'm going to be sharing my screen quite briefly, and we'll have a brief presentation. All right, so hopefully on your screens you can see the zoning amendment secondary suites report, or sorry, presentation. This particular presentation has to do with that report that was included as part of Council's agenda. A bit of a background to remind Council what it is that we're talking about. Recently, well, it was actually a couple of years ago at this point, the province relaxed restrictions related to secondary suites in the BC Building Code. That included changing the definition and allowing them to be located in additional housing forms through that definition, and also allowing them to be any size. So there's no more size maximum or minimum within the BC Building Code. There were earlier somewhat more restrictive secondary suite definition and permissions are currently what's contained within the Tofino zoning bylaw. And so these more restrictive provisions of the code, the province has found maybe posing a bit of an impediment to the addition of affordable housing within the province. So with this particular zoning amendment bylaw, we're looking to match up our zoning amendment or zoning bylaw with these changes to the BC Building Code so that we can take advantage of potentially adding some more housing stock to the town. Just for Council's information, first and second reading were granted to the proposed amendments on February 22nd, and the public hearing was held on April 26th. That was at the last Council meeting. So the amendment would essentially, as noted, match up the Tofino zoning bylaw with the permissions and definition within the BC Building Code, allowing the district to really take advantage of the province's relaxations around secondary suites, looking to create additional housing units in the community. Specific changes would include matching the BC definition of secondary suites, and then within the other parts of the zoning bylaw, relaxing size restrictions and adding permissions for suites in different forms of housing and different zones. One of the zones that has long been discussed to add secondary suites to would be the Ocean Park Comprehensive Development Zone. That would be permitted through this zoning amendment. This graphic I found pretty useful in helping me understand kind of the changes and where secondary suites would be permitted and where they would not be. The one thing that's worth noting is that the idea of a kind of vertical fire separation from the very bottom of basically the floor, the first floor of any dwelling unit, all the way to the roof, is kind of one of the defining characteristics of allowing a secondary suite. This essentially means that for things like fourplexes or apartment buildings or up-down duplexes, secondary suites would not be permitted. However, in side-by-side duplexes or row housing, or dwelling units attached to other occupancies such as industrial units or commercial units, secondary suites would now be permitted in those where they previously were not. There's a couple council concerns that were brought up that staff heard during the initial consideration of this particular amendment bylaw. There was some concern about not having a minimum size for suites and that essentially allowing very micro suites to be built, which may or may not be suitable for living. In the absence of a policy around what's considered suitable housing within the District of Tofino, staff are hesitant and really unable to comment with respect to that. However, for council's information, we did have some conversations with the Tofino Housing Corporation as local experts in housing, as well as reviewing the housing needs assessments. And there's generally an understanding that housing across the board is beneficial to the community, and smaller housing units, even if they are quite small secondary suites, may provide useful and more affordable housing for people who need it in the community. It's also worth noting, and this is in conversation with the building inspector, that it's not typical for new builds in particular, if somebody's looking to either renovate or build a new house with a secondary suite, for them to make it particularly small. If you are bothering to build a secondary suite, it's worth building it to a reasonable size so that you have a reliable tenant and can charge a reasonable rental fee for that particular unit. And I believe there were also some council concerns about the potential changes to the community through these new allowances. Staff are of the opinion that the allowances will not alter existing dwellings very much due to usually the actual nature of the construction of those dwellings, as well as setbacks, parking requirements, lot coverage requirements within the zoning bylaw often make significant renovations challenging. However, what this will mean is that for a lot of new construction, secondary suites may be permitted in forms of housing that they were not previously permitted. It is worth noting, though, that most zoned land for particularly single-family dwellings has been built out within the District of Tofino, and any major new developments will likely be going through a rezoning process, and council will have significant control over density and form of housing through that process. So staff are of the opinion that as we already permit secondary suites throughout the community in many forms of housing, that this amendment to the zoning bylaw won't result, at least in any immediate major changes to housing in the community or to existing neighborhoods within the community. Quick review of the public hearing was held at the last council meeting on April 26. Staff received no public responses prior to the hearing and no comments were made at the hearing. The one other thing that's I wanted to mention with regards to this particular bylaw is, because it is a zoning bylaw, we actually have an exception to the standard process where we can read the zoning bylaw a third time and as well adopt it at the same meeting as third reading was given. The reason we typically don't do that is usually between third and fourth reading, there's some additional legal agreements or additional concerns that need to be addressed by an applicant. However, as this is a district initiated zoning amendment and there are no outstanding legal agreements that need to be dealt with between third and fourth reading, and because this happens to be a zoning bylaw amendment and we have permission through the Local Government Act to adopt the bylaw at the same meeting as third reading, staff are recommending that we do that if council is comfortable. If there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to speak to them. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Thick. I see no questions or comments. Oh, we do. Councilor Thick.
I have a question, please. I just wondered, in the report, it talked about the firewalls and the legally required one parking space per secondary suite within the size, or sorry, within the lot. Am I remembering this correctly, that you just said there was a firewall and there was one parking space requirement for a secondary suite that was a legal secondary suite?
Yeah, sure. So the reason I mentioned the vertical fire separation or the firewall was that's kind of been the defining feature of the secondary suite in the new BC Building Code definition. So there needs to be essentially, when we're considering secondary suites within dwelling units, there needs to be a complete vertical firewall separation between the dwelling units. So that's where side-by-side duplexes and row housing meet that requirement. However, up and down duplexes, for example, have a horizontal fire separation, so they do not meet that requirement. So a secondary suite would not be permitted in an up-down duplex, for example, or an apartment building within one of the apartments. However, they would be permitted in side-by-side duplexes or row housing. That was why I ended up mentioning the fire separation, mostly not that it pertains directly to this particular zoning amendment, but that's the defining feature of a dwelling unit that is permitted to have a secondary suite within it. And as far as the parking goes, one of the other reasons that it's unlikely that secondary suites will start popping up in existing townhomes, for example, is that we through our building bylaw, we require and through our zoning bylaw as well, we typically require what works out to be about one parking space per dwelling unit on a residential lot. So for example, if we have a house with a secondary suite, the main house requires one off-street parking space and the secondary suite requires one off-street parking space. On a larger residential lot, this is typically not a problem, but for an existing townhouse where parking is already fairly tight, it may just not be feasible for them to meet the parking requirement needed, as well as various other issues with renovating existing townhomes to accommodate a secondary suite within them. And staff mentioned that mostly to kind of say that it is unlikely that this particular zoning amendment is going to change existing row housing or town housing or other forms of housing within the District of Tofino. However, for new developments, it may be something that they can take advantage of, depending on how much parking they have and how much space they have to develop.
Right.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I understand. I just wondered whose job it will be to oversee those two particular items that we've just spoken about. Like, who is going to oversee the fact that that parking space is actually there, or that firewall is actually there?
Those are typically addressed at building permit stage. So when somebody applies for a building permit, that goes through a zoning review, and the zoning department essentially checks things related to zoning, so setbacks and height and lot coverage and parking requirements. And then the building inspector will do more detailed analysis of the proposed building and any design requirements. Should they not meet those requirements, they won't be granted a building permit. And if they're not granted a building permit, they won't have an occupancy permit, and they will not have a legal suite as a result of that. And I think, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Right. So if there would be a with regard to the parking in particular, because that's an issue that we have, then there would be, as part of that, development permit granted, there would be a map or a parking plan given to the inspector.
That's correct. Yeah, with every building permit application we get, we require a BCLS survey showing the actual site and the whatever is going to be built, as well as where parking is going to be placed on that property, should it be required. For example, if it's a building permit for a accessory building, that's not requiring parking, but if it is for a new habitable structure, that will require an off-street parking space. And it does often happen that parking spills out onto the street or is within a front yard setback. At that point, it typically becomes a bylaw enforcement issue.
Right, thank you. I just want to make sure that there was checks and balances on that, since parking is a pretty big issue for us in residential neighborhoods. So.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, yeah, I would say that there are, if a secondary suite or some construction continues without a building permit, then essentially it's in the eyes of the district illegal construction, and will not be granted an occupancy permit. So it's not technically a legal secondary suite at that point. Yeah, so the building permit process is designed to kind of catch any of those issues.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, go ahead.
I'll move the recommendation that the report attached as Appendix 2, containing a summary of the nature of the representations respecting the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1286/2022 that were made at the public hearing be received by council maintained as a public record, and that District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 1286/2022 be read a third time.
Seconded by Councillor Challenger. Any further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried.
And that District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1286/2022 be adopted.
Seconded by Councillor Challenger. Any further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. We have some bylaws for adoption. This is item 11.1. Would somebody like to read the series of bylaws?
Sure.
Councillor Challenger, please go ahead.
Okay, so I move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1273/2020 be adopted.
Seconded by Councillor Thick. Any further comments? All in favor? No, motion's carried.
And I move that the District of Tofino bylaw number 1318/2022 be adopted.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further comments? All in favor?
And
Motion's carried.
11.3, I move that District of Tofino bylaw number 1319/2022 be adopted.
Seconded by Councillor Thick. Any further comments? All in favor? Unopposed, motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 12, business initiated by council members. Do we have any external appointment verbal reports from council? Seeing none, moving on to unfinished business. And I realized that I mentioned everybody else at the roundtable that I had originally for the MRDT except Samantha Hackett. So I just like to say that thank you, Ms. Hackett. Question period. What do you have? Anybody signed up for question period, Ms. Best?
Thank you, Marla. I'm just going to speak to the public again and just remind everyone, if you have a question to council regarding any of the items on the agenda tonight, please use the Q&A function here. If you do not have a question, we will call a second time. And calling a third time. There's been no requests, questions.
Super, thank you, Ms. Best. Moving on to item 15, recommend move to the closed session. Would somebody like to read that out? Councillor Thick.
I recommend that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91 and 2 of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to 1A, personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent. C, employee relations. G, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality. K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages and that, in the view of the council, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. And 2B, the consideration of information received and held in confidence relating to negotiations between the municipality and a provincial government or the federal government, or both, or between a provincial government or the federal government, or both, and a third party.
Seconded by Councillor Challenger. Further comments? All in favor? Motion carried. Unopposed. Super.